Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast with your host, Jerry Rogers.
Welcome to another edition of the Business of America, where we talk to the doers, the makers, the advocates, the men, the women who make the economy run, who work on science, work manufacturing, work healthcare, technology, innovation. We talk to what was Teddy Roosevelt's line? It's easy to be on the sideline and be critical. It's more difficult to be the man in the arena. That's who we're talking to today, the men and the women in the arena making things happen. We're blessed today. We have a guest who is returning, a good friend of mine, a good friend of the program. I'm your host, Jerry Rogers. This is our guest, Peter Pitts. Peter is the president and founder of CMPI. He is a visiting professor at the Paris School of Medicine, and he is a former associate commissioner at FDA. The CMPI, Center for Medicine in the Public Interest. I think in terms of the healthcare policy world, maybe the best named organization. Peter, welcome back to the Business of America.
Thanks, Jerry. Always glad to have these chats.
So the big news the last several days, and will be big news moving forward, Peter, and you and I have talked about this, the reason for the podcast today, is President Trump's big announcement, the most favored nation, MFN, pricing to, in the president's words, to make Europe pay their fair share and make American companies come to the negotiating table to bring prices down. I've read the executive order. This is done not by legislation, but by executive order. There's a 30-day window starting, I think, this week, or maybe the beginning of next week, that the companies can come and negotiate with the government. I understand today is Thursday, May the 15th. I had to look at the little date there. I understand today that several of the industry leaders are meeting with the White House to discuss this executive order. But anyway, Peter, you and I talked a little bit about this. What is your kind of broad view of this? And then we can get down into the specifics.
Sure. Well, it's strange that they're calling it most favored nation, because none of these nations are doing us any favors at all. Now, they're allowing Americans to carry the full burden of drug development, billions and billions of dollars, without doing any heavy lifting at all. So it's time that the president recognizes that this is a trade issue. It may not necessarily be a tariff issue, but it's free trade, it's intellectual property protection, and it's long overdue. That being said, a couple of things to remember. Firstly, this is only for people who are getting their healthcare, their pharmaceuticals through government programs, and that's a lot of people. But it's not even 50% of the American public. So a lot of the distance to go yet. And also, when Americans say, my drugs are too expensive, what they mean is my copay is too expensive. And it's important to remember that pharmaceutical companies don't set those copay rates. Big insurance companies do. So, unless and until, people recognize that lowering costs doesn't mean lowering the list price, because nobody pays the list price. It's a joke. People are focused on what they're paying at the point where they're getting their drugs put into their hands by the pharmacist. As you know, pharmaceuticals are really the only part of healthcare where Americans actually reach into their pocket at point of dispensation. And we've got to help lower those copays. And also, again, to put it in perspective, pharmaceuticals, if you look at the entire 100% of American healthcare expenses, are about 11%. So, people think it's 80% or 75%. It's 11%. And it absolutely hits above its weight relative to the merits that it provides. So we have to be careful not to hinder American access. We don't want price controls. We don't want Uncle Sam telling doctors and patients what type of treatments they can get like they do in Europe. Because ultimately, price controls equal choice controls, which is why we've got to be so careful about not importing foreign price controls.
Right. And I'll add to it, it's access control, because the only way you really control spending is by refusing access. And this is the problem with government payer systems. And again, just to clarify, we don't have a single healthcare system in the U.S. Like you just said. We have Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, VA. We have private insurance. Then we have the whole mess of the Obama exchanges. You also mentioned insurance. I was at a Washington, D.C. dinner this week with industry, with patient organizations, with healthcare policy experts. And around the table, that question came up. Well, what about insurance? What about big insurance? What about the PBMs? What about other reforms, 340B pricing reform that the Congress, the administration can engage now to bring drug prices down? I ask you this: the executive order, and in the press conference, the president said, and so did the NIH director, Jay Bhattacharya, and then, of course, Dr. Marty Makary at FDA. Both are brilliant and good men leading these health agencies. They both talked about making the foreign nations pay more. You read the executive order. Is there anything in the executive order that would make the other guys, Canada, the UK, etc., France, pay more?
Well, bluntly, the answer is no, which is why the way you're really going to get this done is to force the rest of the world to come to the table and force them to pay their fair share. It's really not that complicated. I mean, getting it done is complicated, but the issue is pretty plain. The American public is getting screwed, and the rest of the world is getting a free ride at our expense. Now, another thing that people need to remember is when pollsters ask the American public, do you want free healthcare like in Europe? They go, free healthcare, definitely. But when you ask them, are you willing to pay 25 to 35% more in taxes to have a single payer system, they go, hell no. So, I read the other day that Senator Bernie Sanders is ready to sit down with Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Boy, I'd like to be a fly on the wall for that conversation.
Well, that's an interesting topic, and there are some news items and commentary items out today at Real Clear Health. Our audience knows I'm the editor at Real Clear Health, Real Clear Policy editor at Real Clear Policy as well. Where are the left of center groups and senators? Elizabeth Warren, who, when Joe Biden tried to do something similar with march-in rights, coming in to, again, dictate prices, price controls on American innovative companies, pharmaceutical companies, Elizabeth Warren was all in. This is what we have to do. Now you hear this from the Trump administration talking about importing price controls. That's what we're doing. And now she's saying we can't do this. This is not enough. Where are the left of center groups who you would think would be applauding this executive order, but they're silent? What do you make of that?
Well, you have a couple of kind of ranges of progressive. You've got the loony left, Senators Sanders and Warren, and their address still reads very firmly Fantasyland. They think that the problem can be solved by making government bigger, by restricting patient and physician choices. And I'm not signing on to that. Plus, it's incredibly expensive. And price controls equal choice controls, and that's worse than what we've got now. Everybody else in the middle is unsure what to do because they can't, on the one hand, agree with the president. Look what happened to Senator Schumer when he decided not to block the budget going through, not shut the government down. He got read the Riot Act by AOC and that ilk. So I think that they've boxed themselves into a policy corner where anything the president says, they can't be for that, which basically takes them out of the debate entirely, right, leaving only the lunatic fringe to debate.
And again, just to stay on that topic for a second, because you and I have worked in health policy, and I'm not comparing myself to your resume, but I've been around health policy for better than 20 years. And it is one of the remaining issue areas where there's lots of agreement behind closed doors. There's lots of agreement on what to do in terms of regulation, even legislation. But we hear a lot in town. I'm in D.C. You're in New York City, the greatest city in the world. I'm in Washington, D.C., so forgive me for that. But there's a lot of, well, we can't give Trump the win. We can't give the GOP the win. We can't give the Democrats a win. And so behind closed doors, again, I was at this dinner this week and there were 27 people around one table, and it was a mix of ideologies. There was Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, progressives, libertarians. And there was agreement around the table that this executive order is a non-starter. It's a bad idea. However, some of the groups around that table wouldn't say that publicly. Some because they're afraid of the administration coming after them. Others because they don't want to. They don't want to help the Trump administration. How do we get? Well, how can we get past the kind of politics of this and find some reasonable compromise on healthcare reform, even on drug prices? You know, it's there, and not everyone will be happy. My father said, if everyone is pleased with you, you're doing something wrong. You know, you've been in this a long time. You're an expert. You're a go-to honest actor. Do you think there's hope for some kind of compromise around drug prices, around healthcare reform?
Well, I think it comes down to money and access. So the answer, Jerry, is what do we do? How do we find the practical, workable route forward? Is you got to follow the money. And that brings us back to insurance, and especially pharmacy benefit managers. Because if you look at the role they play as middlemen, you know, it's changed from being useful to being a boondoggle. I mean, PBMs are pulling out of the American healthcare system billions of dollars a year that go straight to their bottom line. It's sucked right out of the healthcare system. And there was a hearing in the Senate, I think during the Biden years, and the senators then controlled by Democrats asked a panel of pharma executives, you know, how much money could you reduce your cost by if PBMs were disintermediated? And they all said 50%. Wow. So unless and until we recognize that part of the problem are private players, you know, playing a little bit fast and loose with the rules to make money, we're not going to solve this problem. Similarly with 340B, you have large hospital systems gaming the system, where they buy cheap drugs aimed for lower income people with no insurance, and then they're selling them at full price to fully insured patients. What's wrong with this? And also, by the way, not providing charity care. So what's wrong with this picture? And the answer is that these groups are a lot more adept at communications. They've proven themselves, at least lately, a lot more adept at marketing. And the people inside pharma, you know, are left, you know, like this and like this and like this. And just reinforcing the public's opinion that the problem is big pharma, and it's not. But if we follow the money, I think we can get to a solution.
You're right. And the interesting thing about Pharma, the trade association Pharma, you know, I've been, again, you and I both have been in and around politics and policy on healthcare for a long time. Pharma was always kind of a first in, first actor on these issues. It seems lately they are on their heels. And I wonder if that's because there's you know, Trump 2.0 is different than the first Trump administration. But again, they were late to the Pharma, the trade association, in my opinion, was late to the Inflation Reduction Act. And I think they're late to this. Look, you and I knew about the Trump administration wanting to tie drug prices, Medicaid drug prices, to the MFN, most favored nation, kind of lowest price of a foreign country, peg that to an American drug sold in America. I mean, we knew about this. In fact, they were arguing over it in reconciliation. So twofold question. Number one, you know, why do you think Pharma might be late to entering into the politics of this? Number one. And number two, the Congress said no to the president. We're not going to do MFN by legislation in reconciliation. This is why he came out with the executive order. What does that tell you? So Pharma kind of being on its heels, and then the president going the executive order route and not the legislative route.
Well, I think what Pharma, both the individual pharmaceutical companies, biopharmaceutical companies, and Pharma, the trade association, have kind of yet come to grips with is that the president's not going to go away. The president wants a victory, and he'll get it one way or the other. So it simply isn't a question anymore of pharma saying no, 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 and beating things down by being negative. They have to have an alternative. They have to have a solution. And there are. And they simply haven't decided to play that card yet, and which mystifies me. And this president very clearly is not going to take no for an answer. So he's looking for affirmative, good ideas. But I don't really see any coming out of the industry at the moment. And that's unfortunate because there are so many good ideas out there that could really get the job done. And also I want to add that the last thing we want to have happen relative to reference pricing, which I think is a better term than most favored nation, is generic drugs in the U.S. are about 90% by volume of market share of all drugs used in the U.S. And generic drugs in the U.S. are cheaper than Canada or Europe.
Right.
Last thing we want is for generic prices to go up because of ill-considered price controls.
Yeah. Again, I read the executive order, and Joe Antos from the American Enterprise Institute. Joe is kind of the godfather of health policy in DC these days, and he said that it read more like a press release. But that's to your point. The president wants a win here, and he'll get it. And he'll change the rules as he moves forward. For instance, this MFN, most favored nation status reference pricing, right now it's tied to Medicaid, or that's what we think. The president was talking this week that it's Medicare. You had reports in The Hill, Politico, Axios, and elsewhere that this will impact Medicare prices. So my point in saying that is the word Medicare never appears in the executive order. However, people in town are talking about how this will impact Medicare and Medicaid, and Medicare pricing, of course, does have an influence on private the private market. And so, do you think the president is going to just ask his health agency heads, go in and look at the rules, look at the regs, and tell me what we can do? Create a secret sauce for me that we can use to leverage the drug companies to lower their prices. And if not, we're going to whack them with this and whack them with that. What do you think?
Well, certainly when it comes to Medicare, that's a discussion about the Inflation Reduction Act and price negotiation. There are a lot of smart guys. You mentioned NIH.
You say negotiation, but you and I both know there's no negotiation. The government doesn't negotiate; the government dictates. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's exactly right. So we've already kind of got that going. But whether it's Dr. McCary at FDA or Jay Bhattacharya at NIH or Dr. Oz at CMS, a lot of smart guys out there. But I think what's really going to happen is the president doesn't care where the good ideas come from. The president just wants a victory, and we all want a victory. And I think that a smart industry strategy would be to figure out a way to provide that is fair and just and doesn't restrict patient access or choice. And I think we're going to get there. I think people understand that just simply saying no isn't going to happen. Relative to the EO, another aspect of that was that the president is kind of threatening that if you don't play ball, the FDA could revoke your drug license.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting point and a very real threat, Peter, isn't it?
Oh, it's a real threat. Of course, it'll never happen because it's against the law. But but the fact that the president's even verbalizing that, I think, should send a signal to pharma that they've got to get with the program, that the old rule book simply does not work anymore. And it's just astounding to me, the amount of wax that is shoved into the ears of the industry and the blinders that they're wearing. I think they've taken their COVID masks and put them over their eyes. They just need to wake up and get with the program and be positive and be an ally and help everybody, including themselves.
Yeah, Jackson Hammond, who is a policy analyst over at the Paragon Health Institute, said this week that the man with the plan, the man with the paper wins. And right now, it seems the industry, but not just the industry, there are myriad health policy experts at AEI and CMPI and Heritage and PRI. There's so many good groups. There really isn't a coherent alternative right now to offer the president, except for, again, some of the things you've already mentioned, and that is dealing with the pharmacy benefit managers, the PBMs, the middlemen, dealing in a substantive way with 340B reform, where rich hospitals are making money on the backs of poor patients. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, but these good programs have been.
That's how you say it, because that's what it is.
and so I know it's not out yet, so I don't want to tip your hand here, but I know that you and Rich Bagger, who I have great respect for, former head of office or at Pfizer, a really smart guy, a good guy, a former state assemblyman in New Jersey, Rich Bagger. You and Rich are going to have a piece coming out soon. You want to give us some of the highlights of that in terms of what you would present?
Sure. Well, obviously we went through in our argument all the reasons why reference pricing is a bad idea. That was the easy part. The harder part was to figure out a way to present trade negotiations as the next step. And that's really what we did. And I think it's the right route. And I think that we can win if we have the political will to do so. And the president clearly is willing to go to the mat on a whole host of trade related issues. Hopefully this is one of them. The problem is that there are no simple solutions. It's not reference pricing. It's not drugs from Canada. It's tough negotiations, bare knuckle negotiations that recognize not just unfair, sharing and research and development costs, but a whole host of other, product and patent related issues. And we've got to get it done. And the sooner we get started, the sooner we'll get it done.
It's interesting. There's always this question from the right of center to pharma, the industry broadly. Well, if Canada gives you a bad deal, if the UK gives you a bad deal on the price of drugs, just walk away. The problem with that, I think, is twofold. Well, three. Actually, I'm gonna pull Biden here. I'm gonna do not two but three. Joe Biden like to make arguments in numbers or letters, and then of course sometimes he'd go from 1 to 4 and forget about 2 and 3. But regardless, number one, you can't just walk away when you're dealing with life-saving drugs. What happens? Do you say to a province in Canada that needs cancer medicine, you know what, we don't like the price that you're setting, we're walking away, and to hell with the patients? Well, that's not feasible. This industry, this innovative industry, doesn't make ice cream. It makes life-saving, life-enhancing medicines. Number one. Number two, the attempt has never been made. I mean, I can't think of a time when a company did walk away from the negotiating table. And number four, I mean, I did it. Number three, has the U.S. government, the proper agencies gone to bat for American companies in terms of the price abuse that takes place overseas? I know this is cliche, but America is in a very real way funding the research and development of new cures for the entire world. And that's not right. Do you think this administration is different and would go to bat and would, whatever the legal and geopolitical mechanisms available, will they engage?
I think that this is our best shot. We have a president now who's not afraid to be aggressive, to be obnoxious when it's necessary, and to call it like he sees it, even if it's a little bit, over the top. But I think we have to be careful not to ask companies to say, just don't sell drugs to the government, because once that happens, you're redlining our neediest citizens,
right, without
access, and that's not acceptable. People say the pharmaceutical industry, they make so much money, they're making money hand over fist. Why can't they just lower the cost? And the reality is that's not true. As you know, pharmaceutical development is a very high risk proposition. Most drugs never even make it out of the building, let alone through the FDA onto the market. So you also have to recognize that when it comes to research and development, it's not just how much did this one drug cost, it's how many failures did you have so you can amortize your investment. And this really should be a global discussion, not just something that the U.S. taxpayer has to suck up on their own.
There are so many complaints and there are so many untruths put forward against the American pharmaceutical industry, the sector. And the problem there is, unlike other nations that have a a sector or a product that is theirs. They promote it, they protect it, they advance it. But in America, both political parties use the pharmaceutical industry as a punching bag. And that might be part of the reason why they're sometimes on their heels. The dynamic has changed where it used to be, because a lot of these companies are based in New York, New Jersey, that regardless of politics, a Democrat senator from New Jersey would protect the homegrown industry from New Jersey. That's no longer the case. It's easy for both parties to make pharma into the boogeyman. Are there things pharma can do? You were an expert communications at the FDA. Your area of expertise, one of them is, of course, is communications. How would you advise the industry to better communicate that they are advancing lives, enhancing lives, saving lives, and they're doing it 11 cents on the healthcare dollar? Not hospitalization, not these therapies and surgeries, but you get medicine and medicine combined with lifestyle, and you can really change your life.
Jerry, what makes it so frustrating is that the people in the biopharmaceutical industry are wonderful communicators when it comes to selling their products, when it comes to discussing their products, selling their products to doctors and patients. And they absolutely are the reverse when it comes to standing up for themselves and for their industry. And again, it's follow the money. However much money pharma budgets for marketing its product, it needs to bargain this. It needs to budget the exact same number for standing up for itself. It's a patsy. It allows people to kick it in the head, and basically at the end of the day, they hope that their lobbyists in DC and in capitals across the country are willing to kill bad legislation. They should spend more time pushing good legislation. And I think
it's interesting. The brilliant point about their great communicators in selling their products, not so much talking to the U.S. citizen. I think a lot of U.S. companies could learn this lesson that Joe consumer, Mary consumer, is also Joe voter and Mary voter. And they don't. They have enormous opportunity and resources to educate citizens who are also patients on the benefit of their medicines. And again, look, I support the president when he deserves it and he puts forward good policy, and he's done a lot of that. I don't think this is that. I think this executive order is poorly written. I think it's bad policy. It worries me in terms of where we're going on healthcare reform. But another thing that worries me, and that is he seems to advance the left's argument, the untruths about the industry. And the president, I get it. When he's talking to the camera, someone said to me, who's his constituency on this issue? And I said, well, it's the voter. It's the guy in Michigan who doesn't really vote. And if he did vote, he'd vote for a Democrat, but likes that Trump's going after the big guy. He likes that Trump has their back. And a lot of this, in terms of his press conference, was very Reagan-esque insofar as he went over the head of the media, over the head of the industry, over the head of the experts, right to the voters. I think that's a valuable lesson that pharma, but also the advocates who are aligned with pharma and life-saving medicines, they should learn that lesson and go right to the American people with, here's the alternative. But to your point, Peter, and I'm talking too much, I apologize. You have to have a plan. So your piece with Rich is gonna, Rich Bagger is gonna offer that plan or offer a plan. And again, I think the woman with the plan always wins. With no plan, you can't win.
And the plan can't be buy tickets to the inauguration. Get a photo op with the president,
right?
Which he'll be more than happy to give. But the president knows what he wants, and he wants you to buy those inauguration tickets, and he wants you to say nice things about him. But at the end of the day, he wants action. He wants things to happen. And when you talk to lobbyists and you talk to lawyers in the industry and those who work for the industry, they're all saying, keep a low profile. Don't upset the president. And sure, I don't, no reason to poke the bear. But there's a difference between trying to buy your way out of a problem through lobbying and actually coming up with a solution. So kudos to the president for pushing for a solution.
No, you know what? And I think that's a good place to end, because I think the president does want that. I think he's looking for a way to bring prices down, but also more importantly, perhaps make Europe and Canada pay their fair share. I hate that term, but they are not paying their fair share for the innovation created right here in America. Peter, I love these conversations, and you and I should do our own podcast talking about health policy and communications. That'd be great fun. But how do people in our audience find out more about your very, very important work?
Well, thanks. We're at cmpi.org. Of course, we promote our work heavily on Real Clear Health and Real Clear Policy. Those sites draw a lot of action. We can't lobby, but we certainly do our very best to educate legislators on the state and federal level. And just we're out there on the hustings talking to real people to hear what they're saying and try to correct the mistakes that they've made politely, with respect, but without pulling any punches. And I think it's time for some very radical honesty when it comes to what's going to work in this situation.
Civil yet spirited conversations and discussions. The public discourse needs it. And Peter, and I mean this very sincerely, I'm happy and encouraged that you're part of that public discussion. Thank you for this. Thank you for joining us again. I hope to have you back again soon to talk about the next thing, or maybe when this begins to flesh out how it ends up, we'll have a kind of a wrap-up conversation. But thank you, Peter. Peter Pitts, again, he is the founder, he's the president of CMPI, visiting professor at the Paris School of Medicine, and an former associate commissioner at the FDA. Peter, thank you so much.
My pleasure, Jerry. Thanks again.
This has been another episode of The Business of America. I'm your host, Jerry Rogers. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Thank you.
This has been the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast, hosted by Jerry Rogers. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream